All right. You got anything else, or are you ready to move on to the next one?
Let's
All
go.
right. Florida State, Clemson. This one, I do think that Vegas does a good job of listening to and taking in data based on as we progress through the season, a lot more than pollsters do, or maybe a lot more than like us talking heads do.
Yep.
That number 2.5, I imagine, was probably looking a lot different before they played Boston College. Boston College is objectively poor at football.
Hmm.
I mean, they might have a great equestrian program, but this year football ain't it. So somebody tweeted. I saw they were talking about how LSU didn't play a good program this weekend, but they handled their business. If you want to be one of these teams that's like playoff caliber, you got to handle your business against Boston College, right?
You got
So,
to do what Washington did against Michigan State.
right, right. That was something. Um, so I think that how bad Clemson looked in week one is kind of similar to like if Ohio State had to play Clemson in week one, Duke in week
Yep.
one, they probably don't
Yep.
win that game. Like Duke gets
That's
after it
right.
defensively, got a good quarterback, they've got experience. So Clemson might be better than we wrote them off for after week one because of the Duke game, because everybody sees the Duke brand and everybody saw how just incongruous that offense was.
Ooh, wow.
But Vegas doesn't see it that way.
Nope. Nope. So I think this one was Clemson -3 in the preseason market. So it's basically shifted almost completely across 0 to FSU minus and whatever the number is. When you bet, it's whatever the number is. Slight favorite, Seminoles. I think you're dead on the money about how burned into people's brains their first view of a team in a given season is. And and Vegas knows that. It takes a long time for people to shake the first view they get of a team. And so it's first impression. It happens all the time in life. It happens with football teams. So it'll take forever for people to forget that Duke game. And in reality, like I always try and explain how seasons work, you've got a team, but you get 12 versions of that team in a given year. So the team you saw in week one, it's not copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste 12 times. You get 12 versions of that collection of players. And so in week one, what it should have been is it should have been a dogfight, narrow Clemson win. That's what the game should have been if it were played straight up, turnovers even. Instead, it wasn't. That's how football games work. So credit Duke. If you have a formula out there that tells me definitively Florida State is also going to be +2 or +3 turnovers, and Clemson's going to have 5 trips inside the red zone with nothing to show for it. If you got that model, I'd be happy to bet everything I have on Florida State. That's not the way it works. Having said that, this is the biggest storyline game in the sport this weekend. And I am counting Colorado, Oregon in that discussion. There has been a huge debate over the transfer portal and your approach towards it in college football. And in the South, and in particular at Clemson, it's been very heated because they've got a head coach out there who is voluntarily foregoing the portal. Just his own personal preferences, I don't want to use it. Florida State is the total opposite. And Mike Norvell has loved the portal as if it is his own flesh and blood. This is the referendum game. Because Keon Coleman is a very important factor in this game. Transfer portal, dude. You look all across Florida State. Their difference makers are transfer portal guys by and large. Clemson, where they lack difference makers, they could have probably gone and gotten out of the portal, but chose not to. If they win 30-27, wonderful, Dabo's back. But if they get embarrassed, if it's a double-digit Florida State win, I don't know that the nation understands how quickly the Clemson fan base is going to turn on Dabo Swinney. Like there's loyalty and he's got equity baked in like you wouldn't believe. I'm telling you, I do radio up there all the time. I talk to these folks. They're still private about it, but every one of them to a man and woman says the Florida State game's where we'll find out. And if Florida State takes transfer portal players in there that Clemson just said no thanks to, it's going to be really ugly. And you'll see coaches shows blow up. You'll see press conference post game. You will see Dabo Swinney in rare form because he will not back off his stance. I expect he'll defend his stance until the death, and it's not gonna jibe with what those folks want up there anymore. So it's a really big game for multiple reasons.
So what if that's an unfair narrative, because what the narrative should be is the quarterback that Florida State developed has a lot of experience and is a lot better than the quarterback that Clemson has.
But to me, that's just an aspect. That's just a layer of the game. Let's say Jordan Travis was at Clemson right now. Who's he throwing the ball to?
Himself.
Yeah, like if they had that, if Cade Klubnik was a fifth-year guy, or if DJ would have worked out and they've developed him and he's great, who's he throwing the ball to? It's inexcusable that Clemson is this average at wide receiver. Will Shipley is their offense right now.
You mean the Christian McCaffrey clone?
I do. Yeah, the one who grew his facial hair and is yelling at coaches on the sideline now. And I appreciate it because he probably feels the same way the rest of the fan base does.
There's a joke for people who are not familiar with us on Twitter. We like to skewer anyone that compares him to Christian McCaffrey because they're only doing it because
Yes.
he's white. Um,
Are you sure it's not the fluidity in the hips and in joint you sure that's it?
I am positive. Okay,
Okay.
so here's the other interesting aspect of this, because I think that, one of the things I've been real critical of Dabo of is he did a knucklehead thing and held on to, I said he was charitable with who he let run his offense for a while.
Yes, you're right.
And I think he did a good job in dipping into the coaching portal, and grabbing a really good offensive coordinator. But then what did he say? What in the Duke game? What was the quote? And now what are we kind of seeing in Tuscaloosa? It's the Alabama playbook. It's the Clemson playbook. How much of what's going wrong in both of those, in Tuscaloosa and up at Clemson, how much of it is because maybe it's a system thing that everyone has to buy into and the system isn't moving with the rest of college football?
I get the philosophy. And when it works, everyone praises you. Hey, we're so good here. We make them adapt to us. We don't make us adapt to them. But it doesn't always work. And so when it doesn't always immediately work, yeah, I think that's a fair criticism. I also wonder how much Dabo actually adheres to that versus how much he just likes the way it sounds because Nick Saban does it. Because that's what they do at Alabama. It's too early to know if that's really what they're doing at Clemson versus whether Garrett Riley can't really open up the playbook because there are pages in there they're incapable of executing right now.
So I was concerned with, I think we overreacted a little bit to Florida State. There was a stretch in the LSU game where Florida State didn't play good football, especially defensive
Mhm.
football, and people have forgotten about that a little bit. I'm not sure they're a great defensive football team. I think that LSU game got away from them a little bit. Um, so I think this Boston College data point has brought the spread down to earth a little bit. And I think a lot of it, to me, I think Vegas is preying on a little bit of people seeing that Clemson Florida Atlantic number, 48, 14. Okay, they're figuring stuff out offensively. But if you kind of dig a little deeper, Clemson had 5.6 yards per play, 6.2 passing yards per attempt. They didn't hit 5 yards an attempt on running the ball. To me, beneath the surface of that 48 is what we've learned to know of same old Clemson the last couple of years. That offense is not a well-oiled machine, and I don't know that they figured anything out other than running into a pretty bad couple of teams last 2 weeks.
I don't think they have either. I think that so when you look at what's baked into that number, I think that the Vegas odds market also anticipates people buying the concept of Clemson as the home dog because that's been like oxygen to Dabo Swinney. And I'm not going to say there's nothing to that, but I'll give you all the home dog energy you want. If you tell me that nothing really has changed about that offense, I'll take Florida State all day because you're telling me at that point the weaknesses I possess as Florida State, you may not be equipped to take advantage of. And at that point, man, like, what do I really care? I'll worry about that another day.
I think that the home dog thing, kind of like a lot of the other fire up a team, they're disrespected stuff, lasts for about 2 series.
Yeah, like you've got to make it click. Then you can ride. It's like surfing, man. And you and I both live in surf havens, obviously. I would imagine when you see a big wave coming, you get up on that thing and you can ride it the entire way to shore. But if you miss it, it's gone. It's 2 seconds and there it goes. If Florida State's up on you 10-0 with 8 and change to go in the first quarter, nobody cares that you're the dog anymore. No one cares that you were doubted anymore. That stuff just, your gas tank is empty already.
So, personnel wise, you talk about the transfer portal, but I also wonder, you're looking at Clemson, like they've recruited well, right? And so I wonder if, if we're indicting a team for not going out in the transfer portal, is it, Florida State did wholesale transfer
Mhm.
portal, like almost not Colorado level, but pretty up there. And one of the questions I had for them was, I felt like, because Brian Kelly's relying on the transfer portal a lot, and I feel like from a culture standpoint, he is well poised to fold transfers in culturally and kind of get them to buy in. And we didn't know with Norvell, but we kind of see that. Um, do you feel like there's really two sort of camps on transfer portals, where you have a team that is really throwing a Hail Mary to do these wholesale changes because it could end terribly? And
Mhm.
then there's a team like Clemson who absolutely must use it, but they need to do it selectively. And if so, doesn't that require a certain level of clout? Like only a couple of teams can do that, because if you're getting a Jordan Addison and you're pulling him from somewhere, or you're getting a Sam Hartman and you're pulling from somewhere, you've got to have a brand, you've got to have a bag, and you got to already be really, really good.
Yep.
So do you think that maybe that's hurt Clemson a little bit because they haven't been Clemson the last couple of years? And so maybe it's a little bit of a philosophy, but maybe it's they just can't do it because they're not trying to do wholesale changes.
I don't think they've ever look, I don't think they even need to think that deeply about it. They don't need wholesale changes. Like you said, it would be a sprinkle, just a little transfer portal sprinkle. And also, you're right, they have recruited good. They haven't recruited great. They don't have an elite top 5 roster. They've got like a top 10 to top 12 kind of roster, which is plenty good enough to win. The problem is, I look at talent acquisition the same way I look at, like, if you butter a piece of toast. You could put 2
Oh, here we
globs of
go.
butter on the toast, but you gotta spread it out. The talent is not evenly dispersed, and so if you've got one position group that is a glaring weakness on offense, and you don't have just complete transcendent superstar multi-tailback stables to overcome it, what are you doing? What does your talent level really mean to me? It's the same way with Texas. Everyone talked about how talented they were for so long. Well, not on the line of scrimmage. It didn't matter if they had 37 wide receivers. They didn't have line of scrimmage talent. And so I, you don't have to wholesale change it. But if you don't think that a couple of key acquisitions out of that thing could make all the difference for them, I'm talking to them, not you. If they don't think that, they're kidding themselves. It's your choice. I get it. It's your choice, but there's also consequence with those choices.
Can give you a little, not necessarily pushback because I don't disagree, but a little pushback on the narrative, because this transfer narrative was very popular while Clemson was losing to Duke. To me, transfer portal or not, that should have never happened.
Well, I agree.
So to me, there is the issue of, like, Clemson might need transfer portal to compete with a really, really good Florida State team. But also, there's other problems there. If your philosophy is to keep your 4 and 5 star guys in house and not go outside, you should still be able to beat Duke. I love Elko. I love what they're doing, but you should still be able to beat them. And look, Florida State, we're going to get to in a minute, but I think that I really want to press that. I think there are bigger issues going on, but I don't know what they are.
I I think Dabo's in a weird spot too. How many coaches do you know with multiple national championships that are questioned as much as him at the highest
Yep.
level? Like there is no questioning Nick Saban ever. No one ever questions Kirby Smart. They may think an individual team is not quite as good as they should be, but like their legacies are set. Kirby's legacy is set. Dabo's legacy should be set, and yet people are openly questioning him because of this thing. That's what this thing has done. It just shows you how hard it is to exist in this stretch, this era of college football. I mean, you talk about documentaries now, 30 years from now, about this 10-year stretch, and everything changed. 80% of the sport turned itself upside down in this stretch. And you got some guys that have been there through the duration. I'm with you on, I think something doesn't feel quite right up there, but I do think it all stems from just a couple of principled stances that he's taken. One of them was, I'm only going to promote from within for my coordinator hires, which was a disaster last year. And number two, in the same vein, nope, we do things differently here. We are not using the portal. Only in the most extreme exceptions are we going to use the portal. That's an ideology. That's what you're falling back on. That's a philosophy and ideology, and that really is the core. And then you have different branches that grow off of that tree that could be, any of a number of specific reasons, but it's all tied to the same tree.
So looking at Florida State, I know everybody likes to point out when a team does really well and then falls off the next week. Is it possible that Boston College was their LSU hangover game because Southern Miss is that bad?
Yeah, well, it's also it's also a look ahead spot too. Um, I still don't know. Like, I got some pushback on this. I said in week one, Florida State is not the most insanely deep and talented team in the country. They've got some really, really good players on that team, but it's not like they're void of blinking red lights that you could attack. They struggled with the quarterback run last week, for example. Just like throw something random out there. I think people built them up to be like a mega power after week one, and they deserve all the credit in the world. But let's not pretend like there are no holes or cracks in the dam. Everyone's got them, especially early in the season. Everyone's got them. So it was a little shocking to the senses to see that game that close. But I don't think it was shocking to the senses to see someone got up to play you the week before you've got your Super Bowl for the regular season. Like, I don't know. I was looking at that game the whole time, and I was just watching score updates because we were up at the Missouri game. And I'm just like, all right, just make sure they win. Like, just make sure they win by 1 or 2 or 3, get out of there. Because at that point, it's like a bicycle with square tires that day. It's not going to look good. It's not going to turn out pretty. Just make sure you don't crash over the handlebars.
Yeah. And I think that, people were quick to inflate Florida State. And I want to get your opinion on this because I have a certain opinion on it. When people say college football is better when X team is good, I hate that. Real quick, what do you think about that?
I don't think there's a single brand that if it fell off the face of the earth right now, college football would feel the slightest pain from losing.
I think the better use of that concept is most fans feel like college football is better when new faces are good rotationally. Like Alabama, if they fell off the face of the earth for the next 10 years and Georgia dominates for the next 10 years, people will love Alabama to come back and be good in 2033. They would love it. But right now, they are loving what they saw Saturday. And I think that that's some of what is going on with Florida State. Florida State is a new face. It's not that they or any program is beloved college football writ large. It's just that maybe Nebraska. Maybe everybody's pulling for Nebraska. Like collectively, we all want them to win a fourth quarter game and we will celebrate. But Nebraska hasn't been good and nobody's cared, right? Like college football hasn't been better or worse for it. So I think some of that, like I hate that quote, but I think that Florida State being someone different and not being in the SEC, I think they're quick to elevate them. I think some of that's going on with Texas. I think some of that's has gone on with Colorado for other reasons. And I think that some of that's going to happen with Oregon and USC and Washington too, in that we want them to be good so bad because they're not Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State, that we're kind of putting them in that category before they're ready.
They did it with Tennessee last year. And now what are they saying about Tennessee?
Not good things.
No.
Not good because Florida's not great. Just sidebar. Okay, so Florida State in this game, For them to not just win, but and not just cover, but to win this game by double digits, what do you need to see that you haven't seen yet? Or have you seen enough to think that that's very possible?
Oh, I've seen enough to think it's very possible. I think they're probably more physical and they'll have the size advantage at wide receiver over everyone they play because they have monsters at wide receiver, but also the different level and physicality they play with. They take pride in just annihilating you offensively at that position. They take the kind of pride offensive lines take in imposing their will on you. And I think they can do that in this game. I think athletically, it's a mismatch against Clemson's defense. I think there are athletic mismatches back there that they can, over the span of 4 quarters, take advantage of. And look, there are a lot of I can't believe I'm going to say this, but there are intangibles that Clemson needs in this game, I think, to make sure the game goes their way. I'm not just talking about home field either. I'm talking about like the hidden yardage stuff, field position, the stuff you can't necessarily predict for. I think that stuff has to go their way. I don't think all that stuff has to go Florida State's way. I do think it has to go Clemson's way.
Okay, and that kind of leads me into a question that I ask Nerd Josh a lot that I'll ask you. If we wake up Sunday morning and the seven of us who still read a newspaper or read the newspaper and we see a headline that Clemson won this game, would you, in your mind, say that says more good about Clemson or more bad about Florida State?
I think it would be, man, that's a good question. You ask that question?
Every time.
Wow, that's a good one. I think it'd say more good about Clemson since we've already seen Florida State do it to a premier SEC team, which, by the way, that SEC team has since picked itself up quite nicely off the deck. I would say it says more good about Clemson. I actually think in a weird way, more people doubt them right now than they do Florida State.
Oh, I definitely think they do. For me, so I'm going to pick this game. I've got Florida State winning and covering 27-20. I don't think Florida State fans are not going to like this, but I don't think they're a top 5 team right now. I think they have what's going to prove to be a top 5 win. Not just that they beat LSU, but they beat them soundly. And so and I said this in the beginning of the year, and it kind of fits into another conversation we had earlier. I'm giving Florida State all the credit for winning that game, but I'm not giving LSU any negative for losing that game. Both those teams signing up to play this game 2 years in a row, neutral sites. That's huge for me. So they deserve a lot of credit for that. I got Florida State winning 27-20. I think this is going to be an ugly game. And the one concern for me for Clemson, Josh pointed this out a few weeks ago after the Duke game or a couple weeks ago, and I think he's absolutely right. Clemson has to find something that doesn't rely on them scoring after a 17-play drive. They've got to find it because right now they got the good, like, we're not doing 3 and outs a lot thing down, but they're so non-explosive right now or inexplosive that they've got to grind out with Shipley 4 yards, 4 yards, 4 yards, and then hope that they can score. I want to see them score from outside the red zone, right?
Yeah, that is like having no money in your pocket and you're driving to the store. It's like, what are you going to do when you get there? I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. Clemson's offensive approach right now is if we get to the red zone, if we get first and goal, we'll just figure it out when we get there. But it's tough to get there.
Yeah, and it's
that's like that Jimbo A&M type stuff. Everything is labor. Every first down, it feels like you had to grind your teeth down a little bit further to get. And I don't feel that way with Florida State. I feel like Florida State could 3 and out you the entire first quarter and put 17 on you in the second quarter. That's just the kind of offense they are. And so I lean Florida State as well. I'm not final on that, but I lean Florida State as well.
So you got some numbers on this. What do they say?
Let me search this. Model leans, it's a dead tie, 28.7 to 28.6.
And it's funny because someone said earlier this week on Twitter that they know who the model is, your model, reflecting us when we mentioned that we were going to be on the show together. We are not your model.
Oh, wow. Wow. Was that an allegation floating out there?
Yeah, they said, so I tweeted to tease this pairing out, and someone said, now we know who the model is. And I'm like, it's not us. It is.
But it does help me to know that that's the perception because I will fan those flames anytime I need to dump off responsibility for an erroneous pick. I got no
So
problem. You
now,
guys can
not
do the
only are
temperature.
you never wrong, but now your
That's right.
model can never be your fault. It can
Yes.
be our fault.
It's either a kid, an official, a coach, or the college football nerds. One of the five.
All right, we've kept you here long enough. Any other kind of parting shots about this week? What, because it feels like this week sets the tone for the rest of the season.
I think it
What do you
does.
think?
I think look, we talked about Alabama, Ole Miss. I think that's a really big one. UCLA and Utah is a very sneaky game out west. Oregon State, Washington State's big too, but I'm much higher on UCLA than most people are. And if they can go in there and get a win over Utah in Salt Lake, that'd be really big. There's some question as to whether Cam Rising's ever going to play this year for Utah. It keeps getting pushed back week by week by week. I'm also interested in a very off the radar game. I want to see how South Carolina responds against Mississippi State, because Mississippi State's totally lost as a team right now.
Right.
And so South Carolina should get that win. I think the number's about 6 or so right now. Looking forward to that one. I'm scrolling the board right quick. By the way, and shame on you for not mentioning this game, we do get Oklahoma State at Iowa State this week. That's happening. The total was in the mid 30s when the line dropped.
It's so just real quick. I'd love to get your thoughts on this before we wrap it. I have, if there's anybody that I am not just inflammatory about, but like I'm all over his heels in trying to get him fired. It's the Nepo baby up at Iowa. Any thoughts about, I think that he's got to have now like 27 points per game to get that contract rider that he's got right now. What are your thoughts on keeping a guy, and in 1 year giving him a raise after he had the 99th best offense in the country, keeping a guy this long? You talk about legacies. Does this kind of tarnish Kirk Ferentz's legacy a little bit?
I don't think it will, because the people who respect him for having the kind of values that it takes to maintain Bryant Ferentz as your offensive coordinator. So I don't really think it'll tarnish him internally. Like externally, yeah, but they don't care how people talk about them outside of Iowa. Let me explain to you what he just did. So I had Western Michigan plus 28.5 this past week. I'm at the St. Louis airport in an Uber. I was up 21. I got 28 in a hook. I was up 21. Western Michigan has the ball in the red zone with 8 minutes to go in the game. I feel so safe, I turned the game off. Come to find out, Iowa turned them over on downs, scored a field goal, and then went in again. And all they were doing was running up the score against an inferior opponent to make sure they padded that number in the incentive part of the contract, just so that they could, at the end of the year, say, look, we got 26.5 points per game. Now, it may have been in garbage time against Western Michigan, but we did it. We're the haters now. We did it. We back. Oh, it's amazing.
All right, Al, that's it for us this week. Thanks so much for Josh Pate joining us in service of Nerd Josh. He's on vacation like he does this time every year. He picked the best week of the year to do it. But thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.